Nearly two-thirds of the migrants earmarked for deportation to Rwanda have been lost by the Home Office. A government document quietly slipped out on a busy news day reveals that more than 3,000 migrants can no longer be located. But the Times' Home Affairs editor, Matt Dathan, spotted it. Well done to him. Morning, Matt.
Good morning.
They won't be very happy that you've spotted this, will they? Because this is fundamental to their argument that Rwanda is something they're completely in control of. And the point is that people have to have confidence that a system works. That if you come to this country and you should be deported to Rwanda, they'll know where you are and you can be.
Yeah, this is the big problem with the policy at the moment as things stand. There's a pool of 5,700 people who they've been identified, but all of those people arrived in the country, most of them more than a year ago, and they're not going to be able to start deporting people who cross today and tomorrow for several months because of very technical details with the legislation. So the question is, will it really create a deterrent for people who are crossing now or thinking about crossing in the next few weeks?
What about the argument that the backlog is one thing, but when it actually is in place and people are coming over the channel, is there any confidence that they will be immediately sent to Rwanda, or will they just go to the back of the queue, be put in hotels, and therefore still liable to slip away?
That's the big question. I mean, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, the former ministers in the Home Office, were adamant that they have to have a policy that turned around people within days of arriving, and I think that is certainly the goal. But the big challenge the Home Office has at the moment is that they have more than 40,000 people who are just stuck in permanent limbo. And so they could pick any one of those people to send, but obviously they don't have that capacity in Rwanda. So they have to concentrate the people on the most legally watertight, who they think will pose the least challenge when it comes to submitting legal appeals and stopping their deportation.
And where do you think these people will have gone to? Is it just that they're in hotels and they look up and think, well, I could be sent to Rwanda in a month's time. I'm going to go and enter the sort of the grey economy. Maybe I'll even make it to Ireland. That presumably becomes a thought process as well.
Yeah, and actually, the Irish saying what they've said in terms of the increase in the numbers crossing the border from Northern Ireland actually creates a sort of a pull factor. That's the fear that people are talking about in the Home Office yesterday. It sends a message to migrants. Well, actually, that's a good idea. I might just nip across the border, nip across to Northern Ireland. But the Home Office are saying basically that it's not necessarily that they've lost and they're completely missing. They've absconded already. It's just that they are not subject to reporting restrictions, so they don't immediately know where they are, and they couldn't turn up tomorrow and be confident that they would be in the hotel, the address they've given. The 2,143 who they can locate and detain, as the Home Office put it, are people who are subject to very regular weekly reporting restrictions, so they are very confident, or more confident, that they know where they are.
Well, that amounts to the same thing, though, doesn't it? They might say we've not lost them, we just can't find them. But ultimately, that's a distinction without a difference, because the point, I presume, is these people don't want to go to Rwanda, and therefore, if there's a chance of them getting away before the Home Office gets to them, they will take that chance, won't they?
Yeah, exactly, and that's. I mean, it's a matter of semantics. The Home Office are really trying to sort of pull the walls over our eyes, I think, and there are Home Office officials who have told me that they are very worried that lots of people will have. But let's face it. I mean, Rwanda doesn't have this capacity for those 6,000 people who they currently have identified, and Rishi Sunak would be probably quite happy to if they were to deport all those 2,143 who they do have immediate contact with.
Well, that's just a final question, because I remember putting that to a government minister, and I said, well, the point is, how many people can you send to Rwanda? And he kept saying the number is uncapped. And I said, well, the number might be uncapped, but how many can Rwanda physically take? How many facilities are available for them? And he wouldn't really answer that. So that's an interesting question. We're talking about 5,700 possibles, of which they know 2,145 of them. Can Rwanda even take 2,000? How long would it take for Rwanda to take 2,000? Do you know that yet? Do we know that?
Well, yeah, both sides insisted it's uncapped and they can take as many as the UK demands. I mean, Rwanda has so far only accepted 5,700, but in terms of they screened them and said yes, we'll accept them. But the reality is that Rwanda, when the scheme was being implemented or starting to be implemented ahead of the Supreme Court, or the plans are starting to be implemented. The Rwandans said that we'll only take 200 in the first 2 months, because we want this sort of to be rolled out slowly and make sure that it runs smoothly, because they just don't process asylum claims on the scale that we're used to. They're insisting, oh no, we'll take as many as we can. But the reality is they only have one hostel that takes 200 to 300 people, and only when the scheme is implemented and they know that people are actually going to be sent, because they've been waiting for more than 2 years, will they then start finding other hotel accommodation. So in the first instance, in the first 2 months, we don't expect them to receive more than a few hundred people.
Yeah. And they can't find 3,000 people who might be part of that.
But Rishi Sunak has said the UK is not interested in accepting people back from Ireland.
I'm not interested in that. We're not going to accept returns from the EU via Ireland when the EU doesn't accept returns back to France where illegal migrants are coming from. Of course we're not going to do that. I'm determined to get our Rwanda scheme up and running because I want a deterrent. I want it to be the case.
No, but this is with the EU.
No,
that this could be part of.
no. I'm focused squarely on getting our Rwanda scheme up and running. I want the deterrent, which will say that if you come to our country illegally, you will not be able to stay and you will be removed.
Well, Dr. Joel Grogan is a legal academic, head of research at UK in a Changing Europe. Good evening, Joel.
Good evening.
What do we know about how many people are going across the border into the Irish Republic, and whether that actually is a direct result of this Rwanda plan?
I think the critical thing to emphasize immediately is we don't. There are no official figures that have yet been published in Ireland. In fact, following the statement by the Justice Minister Helen McEntee last week to the Oireachtas for an Irish parliamentary committee that 80% are coming from the UK, today we had the Taoiseach, or the Irish Deputy Prime Minister Micheál Martin, saying that 80% figure is not based on any evidence, data, or statistics. It's essentially anecdotal, based on reporting by individuals involved in the migration system. So very simply, we don't know if a majority of people now claiming asylum in Ireland are actually coming from Northern Ireland.
Yet the Irish government is clearly sufficiently worried about this to announce a new emergency legislation, and we're going to get the details of that tomorrow.
Certainly. It's interesting in the Irish context that they're actually following almost identically what happened in the UK. So there was a returns agreement with a third country to send asylum seekers to this place, assuming it was safe. Then the UK Supreme Court here in November said Rwanda is unsafe. And then the Irish High Court in March last month declared the UK is not a safe country for the purpose of asylum processing. Again, both based on the same concern that people sent back to these countries, Rwanda and the UK, would then be at risk of refoulement, or ultimately being sent back to a country where they would face death or torture or other harm. And in both cases, again, we're following the same playbook. The government has introduced what they're calling emergency legislation. Now, in the UK, we had the Safety of Rwanda Act, which became law last week. And we've yet to see what Ireland is going to do in terms of their emergency legislation. But it's doing the same thing. It's saying, whatever the courts have said, this country is safe. We can return people to this country. Of course, the problem now for Ireland is that we have very strong political incentives by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak not to allow that, not to allow any returns from Ireland if they did indeed come from the UK.
Yeah, and I mean, we had this meeting today between British and Irish ministers, which didn't seem to resolve anything. You've now got the Irish government saying, well, if they've come across the border from Northern Ireland, they should be sent back there. We heard Rishi Sunak there saying, absolutely not. I mean, how is this going to play out?
This is the very big question. Rishi Sunak has said no agreement with Ireland until there's an agreement with France. Of course, the irony in the background here is any of this would require an agreement between Ireland, the UK, France, and ultimately the EU. So the UK really needs to be having an agreement with the EU, which, as we heard from the Prime Minister today, is something he's quite resolutely ruling out. The big question is whether or not this will go forward to the next government. So if it's a Conservative government, will they change their tune and try and negotiate a deal with the EU for returns? Or, as Labour has indicated, will it try to seek out a returns agreement with the European Union?
And in the meantime, presumably for those thousands of migrants who've gone to the Irish Republic, they're left in a sort of legal limbo. And we're seeing on the front page of the Times in the morning that more than half of the migrants who are due to be sent to Rwanda have already gone missing. The Home Office, in a document that's been slipped out, says that 5,700 migrants have been identified for removal, but only 2,145 of them, so less than half, are actually reporting to the Home Office and can be located. I mean, that's the problem with all of this, isn't it? You announce this deportation plan, and the migrants simply disappear.
This is certainly appearing to be a law of unintended consequences for the Safety of Rwanda Act. Very simply, it's not possible to keep the people who are waiting for an asylum claim, many of whom now, because of changes in the law, are waiting in permanent backlog so that their case simply can't be heard. You cannot keep them in detention. You are actually relying on them checking in and essentially saying to the Home Office, I'm still here, I'm still waiting, I'm still hoping for a resolution to my claim. And what we're now seeing is the incentives are shifting, because if a person feels that by checking in, they might be bundled into a van and sent off to Rwanda, they're very, very much less likely to want to be checking in with the Home Office.
Dr. Joel Grogan, legal academic, head of research at UK in a Changing Europe. Great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.